Room 9 doesn't like visitors, and it never forgets. I won't say what highway number it was or in which exact direction it stretched, slicing through the desert like an old scar across the body of the earth. Just know this, if you're GPS, at some point when there's nothing left around you but dry tumbleweeds and shimmering heat rising from the scorching asphalt, suddenly suggests a faster route along a gray gravel road without a single streetlight, ignore it. To hell with the time, to hell with the empty tank. Just turn around and head back toward civilization, toward gas station lights and the noise of people. Don't let that soulless synthetic voice lure you into a place where the silence becomes so dense you can almost touch it, and where space itself feels wrong. My name is Casey, I'm 20 years old, and that summer I desperately needed money, so I got involved in the business of transporting used cars. It seemed like the perfect job for a student. You drive along endless American highways listening to country music, drink lousy coffee from roadside diners, and collect checks that cover a semester and a couple of parties. But that cursed evening, the old '98 Buick that had already been on its last legs decided its journey was over. The engine suddenly made a sound like a dying gasp. A thick cloud of bluish, acrid smoke burst from under the hood, and the temperature gauge instantly shot into the red zone, trembling there in agony. The car jerked, let out a metallic clang, and died right in the middle of an empty gravel road that stretched into infinity. There wasn't a single living soul around, just the sun-scorched prairie slowly sinking into purple, icy twilight. The smell of overheated antifreeze mixed with the stench of burning oil filled the cabin, making me nauseous. I stood alone in that deafening emptiness, feeling the evening heat give way to the icy breath of night that seeped into my bones. And then, like an ominous mirage born of my desperation, a dim, flickering neon sign blinked in the distance. Last rest. The motel looked like it had been built back when caravans crossed this land instead of cars. Peeling paint hung in strips, doors sagged on barely holding hinges, and long rows of identical windows stared at me from the darkness like empty eye sockets of a skull. I pushed the car to the parking lot for nearly 40 minutes, each step crunching on gravel and echoing painfully in my temples. The air carried a strange, oppressive scent, a mixture of century-old dust, dampness, and something faintly sweet, like the smell of wilting flowers in a cemetery, though there wasn't a drop of water for miles. Inside the reception area, it was even gloomier than outside. Behind a dusty counter lit by a single flickering bulb sat an old man. His skin was so dry and wrinkled it resembled ancient parchment forgotten in a basement, and his eyes were so pale and devoid of pigment they looked like transparent glass beads. He stared at me for a long time without blinking, as if studying an exhibit in a museum, before slowly handing me a heavy brass key. His fingers, bony, long, and unnaturally cold, brushed my warm palm for a moment, and I involuntarily flinched as if shocked.
"Room 9, son,"
he rasped, his voice sounding like he hadn't used his vocal cords in 30 years.
"Just remember one rule. Listen carefully because this place doesn't give second chances. There's a ventilation grate in the ceiling of your room. It's as old as everything else here. No matter what you hear up there, whatever sounds, whispers, scratching, or scraping come from that dark shaft, don't you dare raise your head. Never look up and never try to see what lives in the void. Just lie down and stare at the floor. Do you understand me?
I nodded quickly, deciding the old man had simply gone mad from loneliness in the desert or was trying to scare a city kid for his own amusement. Room 9 greeted me with the suffocating smell of cheap alkaline soap, old tobacco, and staleness. I threw my bag onto the bed, which groaned loudly under my weight as if protesting. The walls were frighteningly thin. I could hear the wind howling through cracks in the building, slamming against the wooden facade so hard the walls trembled. The silence inside wasn't just the absence of sound. It was tangible, thick, and viscous. I could hear blood rushing in my ears and my heart pounding like a drum. Directly above the bed, exactly in the center of the ceiling, gaped the black rectangular mouth of a ventilation grate. It was old, coated in a layer of greasy, fibrous dust, and I felt as though grave-cold air was seeping from that dark opening. Cold no heater in the world could dispel. I couldn't fall asleep despite my monstrous exhaustion. Every spring in the stiff mattress dug into my body, and the strange old man's words buzzed in my head like an annoying fly. I lay staring at the wall, listening to every rustle outside. Around 2 in the morning, the natural sounds completely died away, and something else began. At first, it was a faint scraping, like dry leaves skittering across the roof. But then the sound transformed into a heavy, rhythmic, wet dragging. It was as if someone or something was dragging a massive, impossibly heavy, completely soaked leather sack filled with something soft across the roof right above my head. The sound moved slowly and deliberately until it stopped directly above the ventilation opening. My heart began pounding against my ribs so hard it hurt to breathe. I felt sticky fear seep under my clothes, paralyzing my limbs. But true horror washed over me a second later. Right above my head, behind the thin grate, there was a sound. It wasn't a moan or a growl. It was quiet, crystal clear, almost melodic childlike laughter. High-pitched and ringing. It sounded so wildly out of place in that rotten, abandoned place that the hair on my body stood on end.
Play with me.
The voice whispered. It didn't sound human. It sounded like wind pushing dry leaves down an empty concrete corridor. In that moment, I lost control. All my common sense, all the old man's warnings and my survival instincts evaporated, replaced by panicked curiosity. My fingers reached for the phone on the nightstand. I turned on the flashlight and, holding my breath, aimed the beam of blinding white light straight at the black vent. The light revealed not a child's face and not an empty shaft. Something massive and alien had been forcefully wedged into the narrow duct. I saw pale, deathly white skin covered in a dense web of pulsating blue veins. It was a huge, deformed shoulder straining into the narrow metal box. It was so unbelievably broad that the thin metal grate groaned and warped under its monstrous pressure. The creature wasn't just there. It filled the entire space above my room, forcing the air out. It instantly knew it had been discovered. The laughter cut off as abruptly as if flipped off by a switch. Silence followed, worse and louder than any scream. A silence in which I could hear the ringing in my own ears. Then the metal grate began slowly bending outward with a horrific scraping sound. The creature wasn't in a hurry. It moved methodically, as if savoring every second of my paralyzing terror. From the dark opening, limbs slowly descended, unbelievably long, bony, and seemingly jointless. It was Lanky Jeremy. I remembered fragments of stories I'd heard from older transport drivers in roadside bars. Stories I'd dismissed as stupid tales to scare rookies. They said Jeremy was a mistake of nature, a creature from places where there is no light. He had no face in the usual sense, only a smooth, stretched mask of damp skin without mouth or nose. But his eyes, they weren't where they should be. Small, black, wet slits were located at the very bottom of his face, where nostrils should have been. They looked up at you from below, even when he towered above, twisting reality itself. His fingers, long, thin, jointed like a giant spider's legs, touched my bedsheet, leaving damp gray stains. I leapt from the bed and rushed to the door, frantically yanking the handle, but it was dead, locked tight from the outside. I slammed my shoulder against the old wood, screaming until my voice broke, but the empty motel corridor answered only with indifferent, hollow echoes. Jeremy kept crawling down inch by inch. His body, wrapped in a filthy, slime-slick raincoat, stretched and bent as if made not of bones but dense black rubber. He stepped over the furniture. His legs had already touched the floor in the far corner while his torso still remained in the vent, slowly flowing out. I realized I had only seconds before he was fully inside the room, and then there would be nowhere to run. Jeremy moved slowly, but each step covered meters at a time. The only tiny chance was the small fly-specked bathroom window. I rushed inside, slammed the flimsy door, and braced it with my back, feeling something cold and strong press against it from the other side. In the main room, a heavy, wet thud sounded. The creature had finally left its ceiling cocoon. Then came a strange sound. Fast, rhythmic tapping, like knitting needles clicking rapidly on tile. The bathroom window was sealed shut with old oil paint. The handle wouldn't budge under my numb fingers. Without another second's hesitation, I wrapped my right hand in a dirty towel and struck the cloudy glass with all my strength, pouring every ounce of fear and desperation into the blow. It shattered into thousands of sharp, glittering blades. I felt the glass slice deep into my skin, felt thick, warm blood pour over my palms and drip to the floor, but that pain was nothing compared to the icy, animal terror driving me forward. I literally tumbled outside into the cool night air, landing on sharp gravel and scraping my knees raw. I ran to my Buick, barely feeling the ground or the pain. I jumped into the smoky cabin and jammed the key into the ignition until my joints cracked. The car, which had been a dead heap of metal just hours earlier, suddenly roared, spewing black smoke, and started on the first turn. I sped off, flooring the pedal and kicking up massive clouds of dust. In the rearview mirror, before the darkness swallowed him, I saw him. Lanky Jeremy stood in the middle of the gravel road in the glow of my taillights. He was so impossibly tall that his head reached the level of the motel roof's awning. His endless thin arms slowly, almost gracefully and ceremoniously, lifted upward. He wasn't chasing me. He was simply waving goodbye like an old friend promising to return to that room someday. I drove all night without slowing down or looking around until the saving lights of a big city and the noise of civilization appeared ahead. Only when I was finally in my small, safe fourth-floor apartment could I take my first deep breath. My hands were bandaged, and my whole body ached from cuts and bruises. I began mechanically unpacking the things I had grabbed in my frantic escape. My old travel bag was coated in foul gray dust from the motel. I dumped its contents onto my clean bed and froze as my heart dropped into my stomach. Among my belongings, next to a tangled phone charger, my passport, and a pack of cigarettes, lay something I was absolutely certain I had not put there. It was the same old brass key, covered in flakes of reddish rust, with a large 9 engraved on it. It gave off a distinct, nauseating smell. The smell of wet fur, old pine needles, and decay. My hands shook so violently that I dropped the key onto the floor. How could it be here? I hadn't touched it after entering the room. The next morning, I woke to a strange, sticky chill coming from above. I opened my eyes and instinctively looked at my bedroom ceiling. All my life it had been perfectly smooth, white, and boring. But now, right in the center above my pillow, gaped a rectangular ventilation grate. Old, bent, covered in thick greasy dust and remnants of cobwebs. It was an exact copy down to every scratch of the one from last rest. I lay completely still, afraid even to blink, feeling cold sweat flood my eyes, and in the dead, ringing silence of my city apartment, from somewhere above, behind the rusty metal mesh, came quiet, barely audible, but infinitely joyful, childlike laughter. Jeremy didn't need to chase me down the road. He simply moved in with me. Now I know the terrible truth. Someday, in a week or in a year, I will lose my vigilance, forget myself, and look up, and then last rest will become my only and final address. What do you do if the monster isn't just chasing you, but is already inside your car? Alex miraculously escaped from the concrete maze, but the rusty dust under his fingernails reminds him every night. The clicker didn't stay in the tunnel. It waits for every subsequent flicker of the light bulb in your apartment. The full version of the video is on my YouTube channel.